I spent 31 years as a banker. I wrote the document that describes exactly how long your ATM keeps working when the power goes out. I knew every vulnerability in the system. I was the last person on earth who should have come back from 11 minutes of clinical death carrying a specific date, the date the grid falls, given to me by a presence I can only describe as Jesus. And yet, there is something I need to tell you about that date before I tell you anything else. What I was shown is that the move away from cash, the one that has been happening quietly for 15 years, the one most people accepted as convenience, is not a coincidence. Cash becoming useless is not what happens after the grid falls. It is what had to happen first. I helped build that condition without knowing what I was building. That is the thing I came back carrying. That is the thing I have spent 3 years trying to find the right words for. I was clinically dead for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. It is in the Riverside Methodist Hospital record. What happened in those 11 minutes is the reason I resigned from the bank. It is the reason I am here. If you believe that people who have seen something specific, something with a date attached to it, have an obligation to say it out loud, subscribe to this channel. There are more accounts like mine, and they are not vague. In the comments, I want to ask you one thing. How much of what you own right now requires electricity to access? Just think about that number. Write it down if you want. And then stay with me, because there was a meeting. March 2019. A young analyst, her name was Claire, she was 26 years old, stood up in that conference room and told us exactly what was coming. She had a slide deck, 41 slides. She had stayed late 3 nights running to build it, and she got through maybe 4 of them before I cut her off. I told the room we weren't in the business of modeling infrastructure catastrophe scenarios. I told her that the Federal Reserve had stress tested for grid events and that our continuity protocols were more than adequate. I used those exact words, more than adequate. And then I thanked her for her thoroughness, the way you thank someone before you dismiss them, and I moved us to the next agenda item. I died 4 years later. And when I was on the other side, when I was in a place where I understood things not because I had studied them, but because they were simply completely unavoidably true, I was shown that meeting again. Not as punishment, not as judgment, as information. I was shown what those 40 seconds cost. I was shown Claire sitting back down at that table. I was shown the slide she never got to, slide 22, which I somehow knew contained the specific failure cascade she had modeled. And I was shown what it means when the person in the room with the professional authority uses it to stop the truth from reaching the people who need it. That is why I am here. That is why, after 14 months of saying nothing to anyone outside my immediate family, I am telling you this now. Because I was sent back carrying something I did not ask for, and I was told, not suggested, told, that my silence had a deadline. I am inside that deadline. My name is Richard Calloway. For 31 years, I was a senior vice president of commercial lending at a regional bank in Columbus, Ohio. I was not a spiritual man. I was not a man who used words like testimony or vision without a private sense of embarrassment. I was a man who believed in things you could document, balance sheets, actuarial tables, the Federal Reserve's published stress test results. I was the man at the bank who wrote our grid outage continuity protocols, the internal document that describes, in precise procedural terms, exactly how long the ATMs stay functional on backup generator power, exactly how long we can process digital transactions before the system has to go dark, and exactly at what point the institution suspends all services and tells customers to come back when the power is restored. I knew that document. I had written it myself. I want you to understand who I was before I tell you what I saw. Because the man who walked into his office on the morning of March 14, 2023, was not the kind of man who comes back from a medical event with visions of Jesus and prophetic dates. That man would have found this embarrassing. That man would have told you, with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades being paid to be right, that oxygen-deprived brains produce hallucinations. That man had read one book about near-death experiences. A colleague had left it in the office break room, and he had picked it up with the same curiosity he would have brought to a car manual, and had come away satisfied that the phenomenon was neurological. The accounts were sincere but mistaken, and that there was nothing further to discuss. That was the man who sat down at his desk that Tuesday morning. I had a 9 o'clock call with our regional director. I had an amortization schedule open in front of me. I was circling a number with a mechanical pencil. I always used a mechanical pencil, always the same kind, the kind with the blue grip. And I was thinking about the Q1 projections and whether the Hendricks County commercial portfolio needed to be restructured before end of quarter. That is how ordinary the morning was. At 9:47, I experienced what I initially told myself was indigestion. It was not indigestion. My cardiologist would later describe it as a complete occlusion of the left anterior descending artery, the one they call the widowmaker, because of what it does to men my age who are sitting at their desks on ordinary Tuesday mornings thinking about Q1 projections. I remember the pencil leaving my hand. I heard it hit the floor. That is the last sound I registered inside my body. The last physical sensation was the pencil leaving my fingers. My assistant Diane found me. She started chest compressions immediately. She had taken a certification course the previous fall, which I had signed off on as a line item in the department budget without giving it a second thought. The paramedics worked on me in the parking lot of that bank for 11 minutes before they got a pulse. 11 minutes and 40 seconds of clinical death, documented in the Riverside Methodist Hospital record. I was not in my body for those 11 minutes. I want to describe what I mean when I say that. I do not mean I had a dream. I do not mean I experienced something dreamlike or impressionistic or open to interpretation. I was somewhere. I was perceiving something. I was aware of being aware, in a way that was more precise and more complete than any awareness I have ever had in this body, including in my best moments of professional clarity. I was above the parking lot. I could see the flat March light on the pavement. I could see Diane's hands on my chest. She was doing it correctly, I noted that, with the strange detachment of someone watching a procedure being performed on someone else. I could see the paramedics. I could see the exact position of the ambulance. And then I was somewhere else entirely. What I need you to understand about the transition, and I want you to stay with me here because this is where most accounts of near-death experiences fail to communicate what the experience actually is. What I need you to understand is that it was not a gradual fade. It was not a tunnel, or not only a tunnel. And nothing about it was soft or dreamlike or gentle in the way the word gentle usually means. It was an arrival. It was the specific, unmistakable sensation of arriving somewhere you have been before, somewhere you know, somewhere that knows you, after a very long time away. The closest I can come to a human analogy is walking into your childhood home after it has been sold and renovated and changed, and then finding one corner, one specific corner with the particular quality of light that is exactly as it was. That recognition. That precise, wordless, total recognition. That is the nearest I can get. And what I found there, what was waiting there, what had always been there, is what I came back to tell you. I want to be careful here. I want to be very careful. Because what I am about to describe is the thing I have spent 3 years trying to find the right words for. And I have not found them. And I am going to have to use the wrong words anyway. Because I was told to. Because the deadline is real. What I was shown first was my professional life. Not as a proud accounting, the way you might imagine seeing your life from the other side. Not a highlight reel. I was shown the architecture of the financial system I had served for 31 years. And I was shown it the way you see a building from outside that you have always lived inside. For 31 years, I had understood that architecture from within it. I knew every room, every load-bearing wall, every circuit. From the outside, I saw something different. I saw what it runs on. I want you to picture something very specific. Picture every bank account in the United States, not as money, as data. Numbers on servers, strings of digits stored in facilities that require continuous electrical power to maintain, continuous cooling systems to keep functional, continuous network connectivity to remain accessible. Picture every pension fund, every 401k, every retirement account that a person has spent 40 years filling that exists today as a number on a screen, a number that requires electricity to display and electricity to access and electricity to transfer. Picture the ATM on the corner of your street. Picture the point-of-sale terminal at the grocery store. Picture the mobile banking application on your phone. Now picture all of it requiring one thing to function. One thing. A grid that was designed in the 1950s. A grid that has been patched and extended and stressed beyond its original design parameters for 7 decades. A grid that the people who maintain it have been warning about in congressional testimony, in published reports, in documents that are publicly available to anyone who looks for them, for 20 years. I knew all of this. I am a banker. I wrote the outage protocols. I knew exactly how thin the margin was. What I did not know, what I could not have known from inside the system, was the date. I need to stop here for a moment, because this is the part that took me 14 months to be willing to say out loud to anyone, and I want you to understand why. When you have a professional identity built on evidence and documentation, when your entire career has been the application of rigorous analytical thinking to financial risk, and then you die on your office floor and come back carrying a specific date that you were given by a presence you can only describe as Jesus, the cognitive dissonance is not small. It is not something you resolve in a hospital bed. It is not something you resolve in the 8 months of cardiac rehabilitation that followed. I spent 14 months sitting with something I could not dismiss and could not fully accept and could not share without sounding like exactly the kind of person I had spent my whole career quietly condescending to. That is the honest account of what the 14 months were. And then I watched a news segment. It was an evening program, a cable news roundtable about infrastructure vulnerability, and a commentator laughed. He actually laughed. The particular laugh that educated people use when they want to signal to other educated people that something is beneath serious consideration. He laughed at the suggestion that a grid failure could last more than 72 hours. He laughed the way I had laughed at Claire's slide deck in 2019. And I felt something in my chest that was not cardiac. It was recognition. I recognized the laugh. I recognized what it cost. And I knew, the same way I knew things on the other side, the knowing that is below thought, the knowing that is prior to thinking. I knew that my window was closing and I needed to speak. Here is what I was shown. I was shown a specific point in 2026. I want to be precise about what I mean by shown. This was not a vision in the way most people use that word. It was not a dream sequence or a film playing in front of me. It was as if I were given information the way a document is transferred, complete, instantaneous, total. The way after 30 years of reading financial statements, you can look at a balance sheet for 4 seconds and know everything that matters about the condition of a company. That kind of knowing. Except what I knew was not a company. What I knew was a date. I was shown the grid going down. Not as a metaphor. Not as a symbolic vision. I was shown what it looks like when the electrical infrastructure of the eastern United States fails. And I was shown it from a vantage point that I can only describe as above and complete, as if I were seeing the entire system simultaneously. The way an engineer sees a circuit diagram, every node and every connection visible at once. I watched it happen. The lights went out from the northeast first. Not all at once. That was what struck me, that it was not simultaneous but cascading, the way a real failure would propagate through an interconnected system, which I knew from the continuity protocols I had written. It moved the way a real failure moves. It was not dramatic in the way disaster movies are dramatic. It was quiet. It was systematic. It was the failure of something that was never designed to last this long. And the presence I can only call Jesus, and I say that knowing exactly how it sounds coming from a former SVP of commercial lending who once told his wife that faith was for people who hadn't read enough Keynes. The presence communicated to me something about that date that I have not shared publicly. The specific day. I have written it down. I have given it to 2 people I trust. I am not sharing it in this video because I was told what to share and what to hold. And I am trying, for the first time in my professional life with some difficulty, to follow instructions I did not write myself. What I can tell you is this. The date is in 2026. It is specific. It is not a range. It is not sometime in the fall or sometime before the election. It is a date the way a contract closing is a date, the way a bond maturity is a date. And what follows that date, what I was shown follows that date, is not a power outage in the ordinary sense. It is not a few days without electricity while the utility companies scramble. What follows is the suspension of the digital financial system, not its collapse in the dramatic sense, its suspension, its failure to function, its unavailability to the people who have built their entire financial existence within it. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to think about the percentage of your financial life that exists as numbers on screens. Your checking account, your savings account, your retirement account if you have one, the direct deposit that arrives on Friday, the automatic payment that goes out on the 15th, the investment portfolio your financial advisor manages on a platform that requires login credentials and internet connectivity, and the functioning of a server farm in a data center somewhere in Virginia. Think about what you hold in your hand versus what you hold in a digital ledger. Think about the difference between those two things when the grid goes down. A bank manager is telling you this. The man who wrote the protocols that describe exactly how long the bank stays operational without power is telling you this. I am not a prepper. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am a man who spent 31 years inside the architecture of the financial system and then died, and was shown, by a presence whose authority I cannot explain and will not attempt to rationalize, exactly what the vulnerabilities of that architecture mean for the people who depend on it. Cash will not save you either. That was the part of the vision that I have wrestled with most, the part that took the longest to understand. Because my first instinct coming back was to think, get your money out of the digital system. Hold cash. That is the solution. But what I was shown was more specific and more disturbing than that. The move away from cash, the deliberate, incremental, policy-driven move away from physical currency that has been happening for 15 years, is not a coincidence. It is not simply the result of consumer preference for digital convenience. What I understood, in the complete knowing of that place, is that the dependency on the grid is the point. The system requires that by the time the grid event occurs, the majority of people have no financial existence outside of the digital infrastructure. Cash becoming unusable is not a consequence of the grid failing. It is a precondition. It is the condition that makes the failure complete. I spent my career helping build that condition. I did not know what I was building. I know now. I want to be honest with you about what it has cost to carry this. I resigned from the bank 8 months after I came back. I told my colleagues I was taking early retirement for health reasons, which was partially true and mostly a way of avoiding a conversation I was not ready to have. I converted a significant portion of what I had saved into physical assets. Not stocks, not funds, not digital instruments of any kind. Things I can hold. Things that exist regardless of whether the server in Virginia is running. My colleagues, the ones I have stayed in contact with, think I had a breakdown. My daughters are worried about me in the specific, careful way that adult children worry about a parent who is behaving differently than they used to. My wife, Patricia, understands more than anyone, because she was there in the first weeks, when I would wake up at 3 in the morning and sit at the kitchen table in the dark, and she would come down and sit with me and not ask me to explain. The hardest part is not the knowledge itself. The hardest part is the isolation of it. There is a specific loneliness that comes from having been shown something true and returning to a world of people who are making reasonable, well-considered decisions based on a set of assumptions that you now know to be incomplete. I sat in a meeting last year. I am on an advisory board for a community foundation, the one thing I kept from my old professional life. And I listened to the board discuss their long-term investment strategy, their 20-year projections, their careful stewardship of donor funds. And I could not say anything. Because what would I say? What would you say?
I came back different. That is the most honest way I know to put it. The man who went into that parking lot on March 14th, 2023, was a man whose identity was entirely organized around professional competence, analytical precision, and institutional trust. The man who came back understands that all three of those things are real and valuable, and completely insufficient for what is coming. I am telling you this because I was told to tell you. Not by a feeling, not by an impression, by a presence of such complete authority that the word told does not quite capture it. It is closer to the word commissioned. I was commissioned. With the same specificity with which a professional receives an assignment. Here is the information. Here is why you are the right person to carry it. Here is what you are supposed to do with it. That is the experience I have been living inside for 3 years. And here is what I am asking you to do with it. Not many things, not a list, one thing.
This week, not next month, not after you think about it, this week. I want you to do what I should have done years before I was forced to do it on a hospital gurney. Look at your financial life and separate what is real from what is a number on a screen. I am not asking you to liquidate your retirement account. I am not giving you financial advice. I am asking you to perform an honest accounting of how much of your financial existence depends on the continued functioning of a grid that was built 70 years ago. How much of it requires electricity to access? How much of it requires internet connectivity to transfer? How much of it exists in a form that works if the lights go out and stay out? That is the question. Just that question. Look at the actual number. Not the number you feel comfortable with, the real number.
Because here is what I know from 31 years of banking.
The people who survive disruptions to financial systems are not the smartest people or the most powerful people. They are the people who did the honest accounting before the disruption occurred. They are the people who looked at the real numbers when there was still time to act on them. There is still time. I was told there is still time. That is why I am here.
You are watching this for a reason.
I have come to believe that in a very literal sense, not as a spiritual platitude, not as the kind of thing you say to make people feel special, but as a factual statement about how this kind of information moves. It does not reach everyone. It was not meant to reach everyone. It was meant to reach the people who, when they hear it, recognize something they already half knew. If you have been sensing that something is wrong with the direction of things, if you have been looking at the financial landscape and feeling a discomfort that you could not fully articulate, then you are the person this was meant to reach. That is not comfort I am offering you. That is responsibility. The warning reaches the people who can act on it.
If what I shared today landed, if any part of it felt true in the way that things feel true before you have time to argue with them, I would ask you to subscribe to this channel. Not for viewership numbers, because there are more accounts like mine. There are more people who came back carrying specific things they were told to share, and I believe you are someone who needs to hear them. This is not a channel for people who want to be comforted. It is a channel for people who want to be told the truth about what was seen.
In the comments, I want to ask you something direct. Something I have been sitting with for 3 years. If you knew something was coming, if you had been shown it the way I was shown it, with full certainty, with a specific date, what would you do differently this week? Not eventually, this week. Write it in the comments. Because sometimes saying it out loud is the first step. And sometimes the first step is the only one that requires courage. The rest follows. I came back for a reason. I believe this is part of it. Whatever is coming, and something is coming, and the date is specific, and the window is real. I hope this reaches you in time to matter. That is what I came here to say.